Certain homes bear more than furniture, walls, and windows. They bear silence, not the quiet type, but the sort that encircles sorrow like ivy on rock. The Whitemore estate had been exactly that, a big house with plenty of quiet where even laughter sounded like an intruder. The gardens continued to bloom. The floors continued to shine, but the soul of the house had been silent for a long time. No one sat the grand piano in the sunroom anymore. Its lid remained shut, like a mouth that had nothing further to say. Then one day, a girl accompanied her mother to work. She was small, inquisitive. Her footsteps did not make much noise on the shiny floors. Her hair bounced with each step. Her name was Tanya. To the rest of the world, she was merely the housekeeper's daughter, but in her hand, behind her back with a smile, was a universe waiting to be listened to. What is it that happens when music manages to find a place in a heart that forgot how to love? When a child does not see dust but potential, and when one moment of soft playing is something that heals more than a single soul. Gifts do not always come in wrappings. Sometimes they come as softly as a child at a piano, playing one key and then another until the air shifts. And occasionally, the most unlikely lives cross in the most unlikely places, not through force, but through grace. Do you ever experience a moment change the air around you? Do you ever see something so unadulterated it causes you to stop and recall who you once were? This is not just a story about music. It's not just about a girl with perfect pitch. It's not even about a wealthy man or a hardworking mother. It's about the sound of something breaking open softly. A house, a heart, and a future no one saw coming, because sometimes the smallest hands can carry the loudest truths. And sometimes all it takes is for one person to say, "Let her play." You'll want to watch until the end. Let me tell you what I saw next. Sweetheart, do you know how to play that old piano? The speaker was on the other side of the sunroom, gentle, courteous, as if he didn't think there'd be a response worth remembering. Mr. Whitmore, the speaker, stood close to the tall windows, his hands lightly clasped behind his back. He dressed in his customary around-house attire, creased slacks, soft cardigan, and shiny loafers. But even in something as ordinary as that, you knew who he was. The sort of man who did not wear his money on his sleeve, but in the quiet assurance in his stride. A billionaire, a man who had spent a lifetime surrounded by excellence, fine wine, priceless paintings, and the kind of talent that only came with elite connections and endless resources. Though when he turned to ask the question, it wasn't out of curiosity. Not really, it was more out of habit. A moment of passing interest. A gentle, harmless thing to say on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Tanya sat on the window bench, peering up from the book in her hands. She was 13, tall and thin, but not delicate, with large brown eyes and long fingers that she tended to wring together when she was anxious. Her mother, Laverne, was the live-in housekeeper. She had worked for Mr. Whitemore for nearly 6 years, since his wife got sick and died shortly afterward. Tanya had lived in this house, not as a guest, not as family, but as a person who existed between the lines of silence. She knew when to remain quiet, when to remain invisible. That was just the way things were. She looked across the room at the grand piano. It was lovely, an old Steinway with a worn gloss, its black and white keys untouched in years. Dust had settled on the lid, and several of the hammers were stuck, but it still sat proudly, like it recalled being played long ago. Tanya shrugged indifferently. "A little," she said, too softly to be heard. Mr. Whitemore smiled, not in a sneering manner, more amused than anything else. "Well then, why don't you give it a try?" he said, nodding toward the piano. "Just for fun, just for fun, just for fun." He said it as if it didn't count, as if it would be some sort of quaint, even adorable thing, something he would be able to regale people with later on. "The maid's daughter attempted to play my wife's piano," he would say with a laugh. "She wasn't terrible, actually. He didn't intend anything." To him, it was just a pleasant little exchange, a little bit of comfort on a cold day, but to Tanya, it meant more. She hesitated. Not that she didn't want to, but because a part of her was questioning whether or not she should. Was it even her place to touch something like that? She had passed in front of that piano 100 times, caught glimpses of it when no one was looking, even laid her hands on the keys once just to feel them, but she had never played it. Not here, not in front of people. She glanced down the hallway in which her mother was standing stock still, one hand clutched against her chest, holding a laundry basket. Laverne's gaze met Tanya's, and she nodded once. So Tanya got up. She stepped silently on the hardwood floor in her shoes. She straightened the front of her plain dress, breathed in deeply, and sat down upon the piano bench. She didn't say a word. She didn't request a songbook. She just raised the lid, daintily brushed the dust from the middle C key, and put her fingers in their places like she had done it 1,000 times before. Mr. Whitemore cocked an eyebrow, intrigued now. There was something about the way she moved, sensitive but intent, that drew his eye. Tanya closed her eyes, and then she played. What came after wasn't perfect, not in the crisp, practiced way Mr. Whitemore was accustomed to. It was something else, something much more unusual. It was raw, honest emotion, notes that had heart and soul, sounding in the sunroom like specters of something long forgotten. The song was quiet at first, then fuller, warmer, richer. Tanya's fingers flew across the keys, not a person stumbling and guessing or striving to impress, but a person communicating a language she'd understood all her life. The music spoke, her story, a girl who sat quietly in the shadows of a mansion, leaving everything she felt in every sound. Mr. Whitmore didn't budge. His arms slowly relaxed at his sides. His brow creased. This wasn't what he had anticipated. Laverne stood frozen in the hallway, as stone. Tears welled up in her eyes, her hand pressing over her heart. Tanya's playing spilled out of the room like sunlight. And when it ceased, when that last note rose up and dissolved into the high ceiling, there was nothing but silence. Heavy, long silence. No one applauded, no one spoke, because no one had any words. At last, Mr. Whitemore cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his tone softer now, nearly hesitant. "That wasn't just for play, was it?" Tanya glanced over at him. She didn't smile, she didn't squirm. She just said, "It's just what I hear in my head." And in that instant, everything shifted. Tanya moved slowly toward the piano, her bony fingers shaking just slightly at her sides. The air in the sunroom was thick now, not because anyone had uttered anything mean, but because this moment was different. Something holy was going to occur, even if no one realized it yet. Standing half, hidden in the doorway from the hallway, her folded towel clutched in her chest, Laverne did not dare speak. She knew her daughter had talent. Tanya had been playing since she was 6 years old, really, doing it on other people's keyboards, second-hand uprights in church basements, and worn-out electric pianos in school. But this was something different. This wasn't a talent show. This was Mr. Whitmore. The man owned the house, the block, and half the city skyline. And better than that, he was a man who understood perfection. His late wife was a concert pianist. Her framed portrait remained suspended above the fireplace, her smile gentle, her fingers poised over piano keys. That woman had made this house ring with music once. Actual music. Classical. Sophisticated. Flawless. Tanya reached the bench and sat down slowly, quietly, almost like she didn't want to disturb the silence just yet. Her knees barely reached the edge of the piano, and her back was straight as a board. She stared at the keys, then looked up at Mr. Whitemore. He gave her a nod, not rushed, just calm. She placed her fingers lightly on the keys and paused. For a very long second, nobody budged. Then she closed her eyes. There was no count down, no wording, no fanfare. She just played. The first note was quiet, just two of them, ringing faintly into the quiet room. But they weren't accidental, they were intentional, considered, like pulling a thread all the way from the center of oneself and plaiting it gently into the space. Then another note, and then music. Not noise, not a kid doodling at keys, but real deep heart-pulling music that sounded like it was coming from inside the piano, not only from her fingers. At first, it was soft, like rain on glass, then swelled, like waves climbing up to meet the land. And before long, the whole sunroom, once hushed, once motionless, was resounding with a sound that was old and new at the same time. Mr. Whitemore stood still. He had hoped for some plinking about, possibly a nursery rhyme, a basic scale, a bumbling stab. Instead, he was listening to emotion, movement, story. His smile crept away gradually, not in disappointment, but disbelief. His gaze focused on the girl sitting at his late wife's piano. His jaw dropped ever so fractionally as he leaned forward, attempting to grasp what he was hearing. Laverne, from the hallway, held her breath. Her hand covered her mouth now. She didn't want to make a sound, not even a sigh. Tears began forming at the edges of her eyes. Tanya's fingers were not swift. Her fingers glided. She wasn't trying to impress or show off. She was communicating. The notes seemed to arise from a place beyond memory. There was hope and sorrow, curiosity, joy, all interwoven in the music like a ribbon wrapping around every quiet moment she'd ever lived in this house. She played like a person twice her age. No, 3 times her age. Like a person who had experienced the world, absorbed its bruises and its beauty, and yet still opted to talk softly to it. Mr. Whitemore did not blink. This was not good. This was something else altogether. She was not just playing a tune. She was opening a door. a door most people never locate, let alone cross. When she descended into the lower registers, the room seemed to gain a new heaviness, sadder, deeper, as if the piano were weeping quietly through her hands. Mr. Whitmore swallowed, his eyes pricking as he realized he hadn't heard that sound since his wife's last recital. For an instant, he saw his wife again, not in the room, but in the emotion, in the music, her warmth, her strength, her loss. And now this little girl was playing in the same area, not mimicking her, but talking to her, picking up where his wife left off. Tanya played on. She didn't glance up, didn't see who was staring. It didn't matter. The music was for the room, for the light, for the memory. For the silence that dwelled in the corners. Minutes ticked by, though no one counted. It might have been 5. It might have been 50. At last, her fingers crept to a stop. The final notes vanished into the afternoon quietly. Then, nothing. Utter silence. No clapping. No one was brave enough to speak yet. Mr. Whitemore sat very still, hands folded tightly in his lap. His eyes had altered. Gone was the courteous interest, the polite curiosity. In its place, awe. Quiet, deep awe. Laverne moved back a little from the door, wiping at her eyes before Tanya could notice. Tanya removed her hands from the keys and laid them in her lap. She turned a little towards Mr. Whitemore, but said nothing. She didn't have to. It was Mr. Whitemore who eventually ended the silence. "My wife used to play something like that," he whispered, talking more to himself than to her. "But I don't think I've ever heard it played that way. Not ever." Tanya merely regarded him, still and quiet. "Where did you study that?" he asked. "I didn't," she said. "I just felt it. It wasn't boast. It wasn't pride. Just truth." And in that instant, Mr. Whitemore, man of status, power, and wealth, saw her not as the maid's child, not as a kid in his sunroom, but as something special, a gift, a prodigy. A one in a million sound that somehow wandered into his home, demanding nothing for herself but to be heard. The following morning, the household was different. Not in a way that was immediately apparent. The rooms remained the same, the routine intact. Breakfast was served, the sheets were cleaned. The staff went about their work, muttering under their breaths as always. But something in the atmosphere had changed. Laverne caught it first. The way the butler, Mr. Jefferson, looked at Tanya as she passed by. Not with pity or disdain, but curiosity, respect even. Mr. Whitmore said very little at breakfast. He read the newspaper, drank his coffee, and appeared to be lost in thought. But as soon as Tanya ate the last bite of her toast and picked up her book, he crumpled his paper and glanced up. "Tanya," he said in a casual tone, like it was no big deal, "would you do me a favor and play again today? I rather liked it yesterday." Tanya blinked. Yes, sir. That afternoon she played. Not the same melody, but one just as lovely, just as sincere. And the next day he asked again, and again the following day. Before long, it was a part of the rhythm of the house. Every afternoon at tart 4, Tanya would sit at the grand piano in the sunroom, and Mr. Whitemore would listen. He never offered her advice, never advised her what to play. He simply listened, quietly, intently, and the house listened with him. The staff no longer hurried past the sunroom. Some lingered outside the door, some paused on the stairs. The gardener even slowed his pruning outside the window just to catch a few notes as they floated through the glass. It wasn't long before whispers started among the staff. "That girl," someone said, "she's not just playing, she's speaking through that piano. She's better than most trained pianists I've heard." Another added, "She's gifted." Suddenly, Tanya wasn't just the maid's daughter, she was someone special. But Tanya didn't let it change her. She still made her bed, still helped her mother fold laundry, still scrubbed the baseboards and helped set the dinner table when asked. The only thing that changed was the time she spent at the piano. It wasn't long before Mr. Whitemore took the next step. One Tuesday afternoon, a guest arrived, a well-dressed woman with a tall bun and large glasses. She carried a leather folder under one arm and a look of polite skepticism on her face. Laverne peeked from the hallway as the woman introduced herself. "I'm Men's Elise Hanover. I've been teaching classical piano for 32 years. Mr. Whitemore asked me to come assess his young guest." She didn't say it, but her expression said enough. She wasn't expecting much. Tanya greeted her with a small, respectful smile. Miss Hanover pulled out a few sheets of music. "Let's try a little chop-in. Are you familiar?" Tanya nodded. "I've heard it. I haven't played it. That's okay," the teacher replied. "We'll do it slowly." She showed her the opening bars and guided Tanya through the phrasing. Tanya nodded intently, noting every detail. Her posture impeccable, her eyes alert. She didn't take notes. She didn't need to. Then, without hesitation, she put her fingers on the keys and played the whole piece from memory, not just right, better. She added subtle phrasing, emotion, timing that wasn't written on the page but felt in the heart. MS. Hanover blinked once, twice, then removed her glasses. She has perfect pitch, she whispered to Mr. Whitemore. And more than that, she feels the music. She doesn't just play notes, she understands them. I've only seen this once before, and never in someone this young. Mr. Whitemore didn't smile, but his eyes softened. I thought so, he said. Tanya just shook her head and replied, I just play what I feel. Still humble, still grounded, not going for flattery, just being truthful. Miss Hanover came back every week after that, not to teach, but to cultivate, to assist with what was already there. They practiced technique, theory, and history, but none of it ever felt awkward. Tanya soaked it all up like a sponge, and still, she continued to assist her mother, never requested to be excused from duties, never uttered a word when she had to clean floors after an afternoon study session. That was what set her apart. She never behaved as though she was entitled to something. Mr. Whitemore started spending more time in the sunroom. He sat quietly with a book initially. Then, slowly, he no longer pretended to read. He simply listened. Sometimes he closed his eyes. Sometimes he would hum along with the melody. Other times, he would stare at the floor, lost in thought. Once, Tanya played a melody she had written herself, a soft, wandering tune with long pauses and tender chords. When she finished, Mr. Whitemore cleared his throat and stood abruptly. I need some air, he said. Outside, out of the air-conditioned coolness, he walked straight. For nearly an hour, he paced slowly through the rose garden, under the stars rising around him. She found him on a bench under the pergola, staring at the horizon. She reminds me of her, he said quietly. Your wife. Mr. Whitemore nodded. Yes, but also not. Tanya's her own light, different, but just as bright. Laverne didn't speak. She knew words would get in the way. Over the weeks, Tanya's playing changed. It developed, matured. Her fingers were more sure in movement, but her heart was still as gentle. She played in a style that drew people in, that mended something in the listener even if they didn't realize they needed mending. The Whitemore house, once cold and quiet, began to feel alive again. Music danced through the halls, wrapped itself around the staircases, and breathed warmth back into every room. And at the center of it all was a quiet girl who once read books in the corner, a girl no one had noticed until they heard her play. The invitation came quietly, without much fuss. Mr. Whitemore had made up his mind to give a little dinner party, just a few close friends, people he had known forever, nothing big, no reporters, just good food, quiet talk, and a couple of glasses of old wine in the candlelit dining room. The guests were not ordinary folks. These were people Mr. Whitemore had known for decades, investors, gallery owners, a retired senator, and even a former orchestra conductor from New York who used to attend the same charity galas as his late wife. They were the kind of people who had seen and heard it all, but none of them had heard Tanya play, not yet. Would you play a piece later, Tanya, after dinner? Mr. Whitemore suggested that afternoon, his voice soft. Tanya glanced up from the bench. For your guests. He nodded. Yes, just one piece, nothing too complicated, just something from the heart. She smiled a little. Of course. Dinner was subdued and refined. The crystal glasses and porcelain plates were set on the table, illuminated by a chandelier that had been Mr. Whitemore's grandmother's. Laughter alternated with sips of wine. Guests reminisced, shared stories, and playfully teased each other as old friends do. Tanya stayed upstairs with her mother until dessert was served. Then, at the signal of Mr. Whitemore, she came down into the sunroom. All eyes were on her. She didn't wear anything special, just a soft blue dress and a single clip in her hair, but something about her presence made the room still. She walked straight to the piano, gave a polite nod to the guests, and sat. She took one breath and began to play. It was not loud. It was not fast. It didn't need to be. The melody unfolded like silk, soft, silky, impossibly emotional. Within moments, the room froze. Forks were set down. Conversations fell away. The clinking of glasses ceased. Next to the conductor, one woman was weeping discreetly as she wiped a tear from beneath her eye. Tanya's fingers moved like they were remembering something no one had told her. Each note held weight, as if drawn from a memory older than she was. She played with restraint, never rushing, never showing off. Just feeling. The former conductor leaned forward, eyebrows raised. His hand instinctively tapped the armrest, following the rhythm, the phrasing. He was a man used to perfection, and yet what he was hearing now seemed to reach deeper than skill. When the final note settled into silence, no one clapped at first. They didn't need to. The room was quiet in the way only true awe can create. Tanya looked up, gave a small bow. Then Mr. Whitemore stood. He took a moment to steady his voice perhaps, and then he said, "That piece was written by my wife." Gasps were soft but audible. "I haven't heard it played in over a decade. It was never recorded. She never published it. It existed only in a private notebook, tucked away behind the piano, buried and forgotten. Tanya found it, and she brought it back." Laverne, who had been quietly watching from the hallway, gasped. Tanya had never seen that sheet music. She had never been told about it, never heard it. She had found the pud-dut-to-pud-dut-dut-put notebook one quiet afternoon, flipped through the yellowed pages and hummed out a tune that caught her attention. Then she closed the book, sat at the piano, and began shaping it into something whole, something beautiful. Mr. Whitemore looked at Tanya now not with admiration, but with wonder. She didn't read that music. She felt it. She understood it, without knowing where it came from. That is more than talent. Tears welled up in his eyes. The guests gave a standing ovation, not out of some sense of obligation, but out of heart. That night, after the guests had gone and the dishes had been cleared, Laverne was called to Mr. Whitemore's study. She walked in, nervous. She had only ever been summoned there once before, and it had been about cleaning supplies, but this time felt different. Mr. Whitemore sat behind his large oak desk, fingers laced in front of him, his expression unreadable. He stood when she entered, not as a formality, but as a gesture of respect. "Laverne," he began softly, "I'd like to talk to you about Tanya." Laverne's throat tightened. "She's remarkable," he continued. "I don't think any of us truly grasped the depth of her gift until tonight." Laverne nodded slowly. "She's always had a love for music. We didn't have much, but she'd practice on anything with keys, even an old toy piano." Mr. Whitemore smiled faintly. "It shows. What she did tonight, it wasn't just talent, it was rare, precious." He paused, then walked around the desk, standing a few feet from her. "I want to sponsor her." Laverne's eyes widened. "Sir, I want to fund her lessons. The best instructors, the best schools. I'll cover travel, competitions, even instruments. Whatever she needs. This kind of gift doesn't come around often, and when it does, it deserves every chance to grow." Laverne's hands trembled slightly. I don't know what to say." Mr. Whitemore stepped closer, his voice calm but sincere. "Say yes," he said. "Let's help her fly." Tears welled up in Laverne's eyes, not because of the offer, but because of the way he said it. Not with pride, not for praise, but with genuine belief in her daughter. Laverne took a breath, then nodded. "Yes, yes, sir." Mr. Whitemore smiled, and that night, long after the house went quiet, Tanya sat at the piano once more. She played softly, something new, something unformed. It didn't have a name yet, but it carried the feeling of wings. 6 months on, everything appeared different, and yet, incredibly, nothing had changed. The imposing concert hall was packed from floor to ceiling. Velvet-covered chairs filled rows down the floor, under golden chandeliers, and the heavy red curtains hung motionless, waiting for the instant that they would move apart and reveal the next performer on the program. Backstage, Tanya waited in silence, dressed in an easy blue dress that fell just below her knee. No shine, no sequins, clean lines and easy fabric that flowed when she moved. Her hair was pulled back into a neat twist, her shoes polished and shiny, and her fingers, they shook ever so slightly. She didn't stalk, she didn't prattle, she just stood beside the heavy curtain, listening to the gentle whisper of the audience beyond. Some would be performing this evening for medals, some for scholarships, some for a moment in the limelight, but Tanya wasn't here for any of those things. She was here for something else. Next, a voice called softly from the wings, "Tanya Matthews." Her heart leapt, but for only a moment. She took a breath, walked out. The lights were warm and blinding, but she didn't look out at the crowd. Not yet. She looked only at the piano. A gleaming black Steinway, polished to a mirror shine, waited patiently at center stage like it had been expecting her. She walked to the bench, sat down slowly, and let her hands hover just above the keys. Only then did she glance out. Front row center, Mr. Whitmore sat stone still in his well-tailored suit, hands clasped on his lap, his eyes fixed on her with the unobtrusive pride of a man who had watched something unusual flower right in his own backyard. Beside him, Laverne held a tissue in one hand and her purse in the other. Her chest heaved up and down, barely at all, and her eyes shone even before the first note was struck. Tanya nodded to them both, the slightest of nods, and then closed her eyes and began to play. No sheet music, no signal, no warming up, just music. It ascended from her fingers like smoke, gentle, flowing, full of emotion. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't boisterous, but it carried weight, actual weight, the kind you feel in your chest before your mind knows how to describe it. It was something she had penned herself. Once she had worked on the night Mr. Whitemore requested. Laverne's consent to sponsor her future. It wasn't titled, but everyone present would recall the manner in which it affected them. The melody glided softly, practically a lullaby, then broke into something greater, something full of yearning, of remembrance, of aspiration. Throughout the crowd, not a single person shifted. Even the judges, experienced, refined, usually preoccupied, leaned forward without knowing it. The room had been put on hold. Time stood still, breath suspended. In the wings, a nervous young violinist who was waiting her turn whispered to the woman sitting next to her, "She's not playing. She's telling us something." The music went on. Tanya's stance was immaculate, hands loose but firm. She did not glance up. She did not have to. All she had ever known, all those times she'd spent within the hush of someone else's house, all those nights mouthing notes to herself as the rest of the world slept, was pouring out now. She remembered her mother ever working, ever consistent. She remembered Mr. Compestant. She remembered Mr. Compestant, a page? Whitmore, seated in silence as her music filled the sunroom day in and day out. She remembered that old notebook and the first moment she ever placed her hands on this type of piano. And still she played. She played not for claps, not for prizes, not even for praise. She played for love. The kind that accumulates in hidden spaces. The kind that finds its voice when everyone else is silent. The kind that speaks, "I see you. I believe in you. Go on." The last note danced out like a sigh, up to the high ceiling and down among the crowd like a soothing caress. Then, silence. A pause. And then it happened. A deafening standing ovation. Hands rose from seats. Hands clapped loudly and quickly. Cameras went off. Judges grinned. Some even shook their heads in amazement. But Tanya, she didn't revel in it. She didn't beam or dramatically bow. She simply stood. She turned first to her mother. Laverna's face smeared with silent tears, her hand now laid over her heart. Then Tanya turned to Mr. Whitemore and performed a small, elegant bow. That was it. Not merely a prodigy, not merely a pianist, but a girl who had been offered an opportunity, who had been noticed, heard, believed, a girl who transformed her life and the lives around her, not by power or privilege, but by sound, by goodness, by music. And as the audience applauded, Tanya moved away from the piano, not towards fame or riches, but towards a life she had long only imagined, a life that had long resided at the tips of her fingers.